You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And a happy one to 2019. While we were busy celebrating New Year's, Trump shut down our government and refuses to reopen it even now. And since he proudly took credit for it, guess what? He's being blamed, even by every day more and more of his own people. But we are back, and we are open, and we are very glad to be here. The children still separated from their families at the southern border made us wonder, what about the children separated for longer terms from parents not only detained but already sentenced and incarcerated? And we have the award-winning investigative, pioneering journalist with us today who has issued a new study about precisely that. And of course, we have Surrealism Corner 2019 and Fighting Words 2019, and before any of the above, we need to look inside the headlines from the last of 2018 as well as the first of the new year. So here we go. Beyond the known world. That's the meaning of Ultima Thule, the nickname NASA gave to the Kuiper Belt object in the outermost regions of the solar system beyond Neptune's orbit. On the morning of January 1st, the New Horizons spacecraft managed a flyby of Ultima Thule and is sending back photographs from this most distant object ever seen by eyes on this world. How's that for perspective? China's lunar rover made history, too, touching down on the far side of the moon, and the Chinese announced that they're planning to land the first woman astronaut on the moon's surface. Back on Earth, female scientists won the Nobel Prizes in chemistry and in physics. Dr. Donna Strickland for physics and Frances H. Arnold in the chemistry category. It was the first time women have been honored for both chemistry and physics Nobels in the same year. Double congratulations. Not that science, technology, engineering, and math establishments yet support women beyond spectacle, tokenism, and lip service. One example out of many, women comprise only 12% of researchers in all-important artificial intelligence. It's sobering, too, to remember that only 24% of congressional seats are now filled by women, a record, when we constitute 52% of the American population. And for the first time, a congressional transfer of power has taken place with major parts of the federal government shut down. However, voters did ensure that more women and more men of color now make a historic difference in the way the United States Congress looks and will act. By the way, when new Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib instantly became a target for saying, more colorfully than I'm saying here, quote, "We're going to go in there and we're going to impeach the mother effer," close quote, you'd have thought the world ended. The tender ears of right-wingers denouncing her apparently had never been toughened by language used by Richard Nixon, Dick Cheney, or Kanye West, televised live when visiting Trump in the Oval Office, and of course Trump himself. Tlaib, while not apologizing to Trump, later said wisely that she realized she had to act more like a congresswoman now. And my theory is that whether or not she cares what her critics think of her as one of the first two Muslim women in Congress, she cares a lot about the disapproval she must have heard loud and clear from her Palestinian mother and all the way from West Bank, her Palestinian grandmother, both of whom she spoke about with pride and respect when just last October she was a guest on this program. That's episode 264, if you missed it. As for Trump, we might note that he's on his third chief of staff, third national security advisor, sixth communications director, second secretary of state, second attorney general, second defense secretary, and more, with the turnover at the top reaching 65%. So, in a petulant fit, he addressed the nation, threatening to call a national emergency if he did not get his wall. But he came across as a cheap revivalist, con-man, televangelist huckster, begging for funds. Ostensibly, the money he begged ordinary folks to send in is to go toward the wall. Except the checks, it turns out, are to be written to and sent to his re-election campaign. All that was missing was a bottom-of-the-screen chyron reading, "Call now, phone banks are open, send money to me and God will reward you with prosperity." Elmer Gantry rants from our Oval Office. 3 items in the "We told you so for God's sake" department. It turns out that the Sanders campaign treated women rather badly. Female staffers were paid less, sexually harassed, demeaned in person and in online comments, and generally mistreated. None held positions of any clout. Jeff Weaver, Sanders' campaign manager and still current advisor, notorious for his sexism, said the accusations pained him very much. But back then, Sanders followers dismissed us when a few women inside the campaign and many of us outside the campaign criticized the lack of consciousness of Sanders and his crew, plus the Bernie Bros' obscene references and depictions of Hillary and their chanting, "Lock her up," in concert with the white and male supremacists. Sanders said he was proud of his campaign, although it wasn't perfect. That is insufficient. They just don't get it. We also could say, "I told you so, damn it," about R. Kelly, because women, especially African-American women, were criticizing his songs, attitude, and actions long before the current exposé about him. But black women are even more disbelieved and dismissed than women as a general group. Third, in the "We told you so, damn it" category, the American Psychological Association now says that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful, socializing boys to suppress their emotions, and that it fosters a masculinity ideology that leads to sexual harassment, homophobia, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression. Well, duh! Unlike the so-called hard sciences, psychology's definitions of normality follow societal ones, and we've changed those. We've come quite a long way from the days when women were committed to mental institutions for refusing to obey or do housework, or for being lesbians or for masturbating. As late as the 1970s, women could be and were considered and diagnosed as frigid because we did not enjoy sex with male lovers who could not tell a clitoris from a cactus. Welcome to reality, APA. Now for some quickie items, we can call them hot flashes. 2 women were sworn into vacant seats in Nevada's state assembly, making that state the first in the United States with a female majority in its assembly. Sumire Nakamura, age 10, is the youngest ever professional player of Go, the ancient, complicated strategy board game that makes chess look easy. The daughter of a national champion, Sumire began playing at age 3. Cynthia Brown, 30, has served 15 years of a life sentence in prison, convicted of killing a man who had sex with her when she was a teenage victim of sexual trafficking. She was granted clemency by Tennessee Republican Governor Bill Haslam, but she should never have served 1 day. Roman Catholic Cardinal George Pell has been convicted by an Australian court on child sexual abuse charges. He once held the Vatican's 3rd most powerful position, the economy minister. Hashtag Mira como no ponemos, loosely translated as "Look what you do to us," there, Me Too, has exploded with healthy rage from women in Argentina. The fuse lit by accusations of rape made by actress Selma Fardin, accusing actor Juan D'Artes of having raped her when she was 16 and he was 45. Women members of Britain's Parliament are outraged about the disclosure made by the Times of London that British women who survive forced marriages abroad and are rescued with help from the Foreign Office have to repay the government for their escape. If they fail to cobble together a repayment that can reach nearly $1,000 within 6 months, the Foreign Office adds a 10% surcharge on whatever they owe. The Foreign Secretary has promised Parliament he will investigate thoroughly and look to change this policy. Rahaf Muhammad al-Kunun, age 18, was on holiday from Saudi Arabia visiting Kuwait with the rest of her family, but she managed to slip away and board a plane for Thailand, where she holed up, barricaded in a hotel room. The Saudis protested to the Thai government, but Rahaf had a phone with her and used it and social media to tell the world that if she went back, her abusive family would kill her. She had been beaten frequently for disobedience and locked in a room for 6 months because she cut her hair and her family didn't approve. Quote, "They will kill me because I've fled and announced my atheism," she wrote. It's a capital offense, atheism, in Saudi Arabia. Quote, "They wanted me to pray and wear a veil, and I didn't want to. I want to be protected and live in a country that will give me my rights." Close quote. Thailand, ready to send her back, relented under pressure of world opinion, and now Australia, which was always her goal, is considering admitting her. In the meantime, she is currently under United Nations protection. Rahaf is hardly the first such fugitive. The global feminist Underground Railroad is kept busy trying to help the rising numbers and growing frequency of young Saudi women desperate to escape their families and the kingdom. And in closing, a shout-out of gratitude to all women and men, hikers and tourists visiting those national parks still open despite the government shutdown. In Yellowstone, for example, volunteer cleanup crews show up daily to clean trash and tend to the great park's needs. Trump might not consider that patriotic, but I think it's beautiful, nurturing, matriotic, you might say. We have to take a short break, but don't fear, I'll be back with our prize-winning journalist, and even before that, when we come right back, we're going to visit the Surrealism Corner. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and let's run right into the Surrealism Corner. Although we have quite a few triumphs for women's freedom and empowerment this week, I put these particular ones in the Surrealism Corner simply because it's been ridiculously long that we've been fighting for them and shouldn't have had to in the first place. For example, London's Theatre Royal in Drury Lane, which can trace its origins back to 1663, has closed for a major refurbishment, in part to meet a need for more women's toilets, 18 in this case. Nearby, the Old Vic will add 12 stalls and the Queen's Theatre 18. Last year, a number of Broadway theaters started renovating buildings to remedy the problem of the long, slow lines, especially for women. This has been a feminist issue since forever. In 1968, I remember that while our buses of protesters en route to the first Miss America pageant protest waited at a rest stop, we women just liberated the men's room since we were tired of waiting outside the women's room while nobody was even using the other one. We could put this item in a new, surreal subcategory called It's About Time. It's About Time, the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick in New York, a driving force behind the famous traditional St. Patrick's Day parade, is ending the man-only policy at its annual dinner in March. I guess they'll become the Friendly Sons and Daughters of St. Patrick, the friendly siblings, progeny of St. Patrick. Wasn't he supposed to have been a celibate monk? Well, whatever they call it, congratulations to female Irish New Yorkers. It's about time. Women in the Mormon Church, properly known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, can celebrate a victory 6 years after they began their campaign, Wear Pants to Church Day. Since 2012, the hierarchy has put more token women in leadership boards. It has somewhat equalized covenants made to God by men and women, and in December loosened the dress code for so-called sister missionaries, allowing those in its 400-plus missions around the world to wear pants when they proselytize. In many of these locales, women can contract diseases from mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas, so this is a welcome policy change. And it also makes it easier for missionaries to ride bicycles and fend off the cold, and to kick, I'd add, and to run. But skirts and dresses, well, they're still required for worship and for community meetings and missionary conferences. This despite millennials, especially those living outside of Utah, the world headquarters of the church, who are just wearing pants to service and not asking permission. By the way, though all men can be ordained in the LDS church, women still cannot be. The original protest on that began in 2013, but was followed by the excommunication of its founder, Kate Kelly. Determined younger women are not giving up. This started way back in the 70s, I think, with Sonia Johnson, who was also excommunicated. And now for some bits of genuine news that you cannot quite believe, so these bits wind up in the surrealism corner. Be extra careful for your health and safety when in Iowa. The state requires 2,100 school hours for cosmetology. This is not studying the cosmos, folks. It's learning how to apply makeup. By comparison, Iowa lets you become an EMT, an emergency medical technician, with only 132 hours at a community college. Apparently, knowing how to save a life is less important than knowing how to apply eyeliner just at the right perfect angle. Ah, the shortness of human memory. As a species, we need more RAM. In Germany, where memory of the Holocaust and commemoration of its victims have been the cornerstone of a post-World War II history, a new survey reports that almost half of people age 18 to 34 said they knew very little about the Holocaust. The British Foreign Office, which tackles grave global matters, also offers assistance to British citizens abroad. Now, you'd think this would be pretty much restricted to lost passports or finding medical help requests, but the Foreign Office has issued a hilarious list of questions that stumped even the experienced staff of the 270 overseas missions in more than 160 countries and territories. Here are 3 samples. One caller wondered if the Foreign Office could provide a list of women in Argentina whom he might be able to marry. Another man requested that the office speak to a massage parlor in Bangkok on his behalf because he'd fallen asleep during a massage and felt he should not have to pay for it. And then there was the man who called to find out if there were vampires in Poland because a woman he met online asked what blood type he was before they met for their first date. The office responded in classic British fashion, quote, we can regretfully confirm that the Foreign Office is not able to offer advice on vampires or rogue stray cats, and our capacity to deploy veggie sausages remains sadly lacking." Close quote. Oh, they'll always be in England. And speaking of tradition, all-boy church choirs, as in the famous choir of King's College, Cambridge, tracing its history to 1441, or the Vienna Boys' Choir, which is nearly as old, these traditions are being challenged. So is the St. Thomas Boys' Choir of Leipzig, which was founded in 1212 and was once led by a choirmaster named Johann Sebastian Bach. A recent article by Leslie Garrett, a British soprano, called on King's College to include girls in the choir, and all hell broke loose. Controversy about gender inequality, tradition, defining tradition, the voice timbre of girls versus that of prepubescent boys, the ways their voices develop differently as they grow, and, get this, the difficulty in persuading 21st century boys to put down their phone screens, leave sports, and practice for choir, singing high triple lines. Some opponents complain that girls are not musical. That's just all there is to it. Others pled for separate girls' and boys' choirs, plus mixed choirs. Look, all boys' choirs date from a time when girls were not permitted even to attend school, let alone join the clergy or participate at all in church rituals. Today, racial and ethnic diversity has increased in leading choirs, and many British choirs that were once all-male now do include girls and women, such as the revered Salisbury Cathedral and even St. Paul's in London. And remember that the Whiffenpoofs at Yale University here in the States admitted their first woman only last year. The traditional, pure, high, clear voices of prepubertal boys were used to begin with because those voices approximated the sound of girls' voices who weren't allowed to sing. This seems thus a perfectly sensible challenge to raise. That it caused such a storm of reaction qualifies it for the surrealism corner. Last, this week's single word from another language that requires more than one word to translate into English. It's from the Japanese. Today's word is tsundoku, 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 and it means leaving a book unread after buying it. You may recognize this either in yourself or certain friends who have some books on their coffee tables, desks, or bedside stands for so long that an observer might wonder whether the book owner is a glacially slow reader or whether she or he believes that simple proximity to a volume means that somehow by osmosis one has absorbed its contents. Of course, it can also mean, "Look, I'll get to it," or, worst of all, could mean that one never intended to read the book, but wants to show off as if one had, particularly if the book or author is a hot topic of current discussion. That's surely no one that you or I know. Tsundoku, leaving a book unread after buying it. Hardly surreal. It's time for another short break, during which we can maybe think about a subject that is virtually invisible, or at least ignored. You know, we think a lot about, and well, we should, the children separated from their parents at the border, the destruction of families there, when the parents are hauled off to detention and the children are hauled off to a different detention. But meanwhile, right under our noses all the time is the tragic situation of COIP, the children of incarcerated parents, and the draconian laws and policies that of late have been put into place to destroy those families even further, and the grandmothers who wind up taking care of those kids. Well, lately, for the first time, a major investigative report was done on this subject, and it's dynamite. And we have that investigative reporter here with us today, and that's coming right up. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And welcome back again. Sylvia Harvey is an independent journalist and a reporting fellow, why do they call them fellows, at the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute. She reports on the intersection of race, gender, and policy, and her focus is on the 2.7 million COIP, that's Children of Incarcerated Parents, and it's a demographic that's rendered virtually invisible by our criminal justice system and public policy. So, in partnership with the Investigative Fund, which is nonprofit, and the Virginia Quarterly Review, she has just released a major new report on the subject, and she's here to talk with us about it today. Sylvia Harvey. Sylvia, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, you've done some really important work. Talk to us about the award-winning cover story for The Nation that started all this and is now turning into a book and into this remarkable study that you've just done. Talk about how it began.
Yeah, so the first piece was called What About Us? And what it looked at was the idea that we have almost 3 million children that have parents in prison, right? We have 2.7 million children that have parents in prison.
Right.
So thinking about what does that mean, right? At one point, there was, it was 1 in 125. That was 30 years ago. And now it's 1 in 28. And it's something that we're not quite thinking about. Yeah. So in that piece, I really looked at what does this mean for families? What does this mean for children? And I looked at visitation, because visitation is one of the most important aspects of maintaining connection for an incarcerated parent and the child of an incarcerated parent.
Of course.
And what was happening was that these visits were being taken away, right?
Oh,
so
my
thinking
God.
about
That's just it's just brutal. I mean, I can remember years ago when I regularly visited Bedford Hills, a women's facility, and because there was a halfway decent warden, they called it something else. I can't remember what euphemism they used for her title, but she was a person, and she had instituted she had expanded the childhood visits. They had a couple of trailers on the grounds, fully equipped, with kitchens and televisions and so forth. And the kids could come and spend a weekend with a mother, and I remember thinking that's almost human. That's at least it's almost civilized.
Right.
So
that's exactly it.
All of that was taken away?
Yeah. So what happens is in a few different states. So I focused on Mississippi and New Mexico. So in Mississippi, there was a program where you could go literally into the prison. They had a separate space for this where you could go into small apartments and live like you would live, outside, right? So you have children that are now with mommy or with daddy, and they're there for 5 days, right? So this is something that was just unbelievable, really, right? It's the most progressive visits in the country. So that happened 4 times a week, a year.
They could play house, as if they were a normal family, yeah.
Exactly.
Nobody factored in the effect of canceling such programs on the women and children. I mean, what was the basis for canceling, for such cruelty?
The basis in Mississippi, there were two reasons that were stated. The first reason was that, there were budget cuts. And the problem with even naming budget cuts is that they didn't say how much they spent and how much, it cost. There's nothing stated about the cost. So you're like, well, that can't quite be it. In New Mexico, they only spent $120,000. You're like, $120,000 is not a lot of money when you think about what it's doing in terms of preserving the families.
Oh my God! And this is from the same people almost always that pontificate about the preciousness of the family when it comes to talking about, say, reproductive rights.
Right, right. And the second reason was this idea of we don't know how many babies are being produced, right? So now we're policing the idea of women deciding to have a child with their partner, even if the partner is incarcerated, right? If you've been with your husband for 30 years despite incarceration and you decide that you want to extend your family, they're saying we don't want that because they believe that these children now are going to be, put on welfare. Now the state has to pay for them.
Oh my
and we're
God.
not thinking about we're not thinking about how much the state is paying or how much we're paying as taxpayers for incarceration, right? So we're policing masculinity, we're policing femininity, we're policing the idea of a woman's reproductive rights, essentially. We're saying,
it's a human right.
You can't have children. Yeah, you can't. If your partner's in prison, you don't get to have children. You don't get to choose that, and that is problematic.
So much for family values.
Yes.
Yeah. So you began research. Had nobody researched this before? It looks like you're plowing fresh ground.
Yeah, there was a book that looked at children of incarcerated parents about 10 years ago, and it sort of opened up the space to say, hey, what does this look like? What is going on? And what I think that I've done, and I have to say that as a former child of an incarcerated parent, right? My father was incarcerated for 27 years.
Wow.
And it wasn't something I thought about too much as an adult, right? You become a journalist, you're doing the work.
Right.
But then when I realized that, hey, this wasn't just some odd thing that happened to me all those years ago. It's happening to millions of children today. And that was I was like, okay, let's really peel back the layers, right? Not just give you the stats, but say how many, why is this happening? Where is this happening? What do we need to do? What are the policies? And that's what I focused on. So starting, at the base, but expanding, going into education, going into kinship caregiving, going into visitation, going into every space that's impacting these families. Right.
Well, it's most obvious right now in, of course, the border and refugees, because the right wing seems absolutely bent on destroying families, separating kids from their mothers, and so forth. And those are only people who are in detention. You're talking about full bore incarceration. Some key findings from your report just made my hair stand on end. That 42% of mothers in state prisons, which in 2004 was about 50,000, identify the child's grandmother as the current caregiver. We know that. We've seen that a lot. But what I hadn't realized is that grandparents face two basic paths in caring for the kids: legal guardianship or for foster parenting. And legal guardianship, correct me if I'm wrong, allows the incarcerated parent to retain parental rights, but gives zero financial or social support. So much for the legality of a real family. But foster parent status provides grandparents with a substantial stipend and access to daycare, after school programs and more so-called privileges. But to get foster care status, I can't believe this. A grandparent first has to abandon the child to the child welfare system and risk losing custody entirely. Oh my God.
Yes.
The grandparents themselves shouldn't have to assume this burden, but that they're having to fight this fight while a daughter or son is incarcerated is savage.
Yes. Yeah, it's, I really look at it and I think that it's a question of labor and love, right? So you have these grandparents that have decided that, well, listen, I need to make sure my grandchild is okay. And they do that. It's just, it's self-sacrifice. Like, it's not even something you're thinking about.
Right.
But then you think, well, how do I do this? How do I effectively raise my grandchild?
Yeah.
And if you decide to go the route that most grandmothers decide to go, is to, avoid going into the foster care system,
Sure.
you don't have the resources. So you don't have the support system. So it's really just you and your child or your grandchild and the love and support that you can give that child, right? And we're talking about people that are generally at an economic disadvantage as it is.
Of course.
So how do you provide? Like, how do you make sure that child can eat? How do you make sure that child gets to school? How do you make sure that you can buy the school uniforms? So there's nothing really set up that really ensures that if you take this route, you're going to be able to sustain a life for this child. So you're living on the edge of poverty because you don't want to go into a system that has proven to you that they don't necessarily have your best interest at heart.
Yeah, you think. What is a slightly progressive way of dealing with this, and which states have that?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, because right now there's only two ways that they can really, become a guardian or a foster parent. And the only happy medium, which isn't quite happy, is to get state support, right? So you can get SNAP, you can get other programs that are offered if you financially qualify. But to date, you have to pick one. You have to pick one. Like, either you're going to take the risk of working with the child welfare system, or you're going to say, hey, I can figure this out alone. I want the rights, and that's it. Like,
so that's still those two choices are the same in all states.
Right. Yes.
Oh, good God! I thought that the two that you were singling out were particularly draconian, but that there were better examples. When did this ruling, as it were, or this fad of not checking with families but just destroying them? When did this start? Because I remember the Bedford Hills thing was not that long ago.
One of the things that, I'm not sure how it applies directly to this, but I know that the Adoption and Safe Families Act in 1997 was something that they said, we don't want to have children languish in foster care for too long.
Right.
So if you have children that are in foster care for 15 of the most recent 22 months, most states have to petition to terminate the parental rights. So you're petitioning to terminate the parental rights so that the child, in quotes, isn't languishing in foster care. But what that means is that you're being forced now to adopt. So in the case of these grandparents, at that 15-month mark, they're then asked, hey, do you want to adopt this child, right? And that's where it becomes problematic, because you may not want to adopt that child, because that means that you're now taking away the rights of the child's parent, which is your daughter or your son.
Oh, this is a complete catch-22 of viciousness. Is anybody, are there any groups that are working specifically on this? I remember when Kathy Boudin finally got out of prison after serving, my God, 20 or more years, that she was working particularly on mother-child issues of incarcerated women. But are there specific groups that do this? Or, a principled listener to this conversation who says, oh my God, I have to do something about this. What does she do? Where does she go?
What's happening is that it's almost grassroots level in a number of different states, right? So you have people that are in different states. You have different nonprofits that are saying, what do we do? How do we be of support to women, right?
Yeah.
And I think that happens in each state at different levels, right? So depending on where you are, you go and you say, okay, mothers in foster care, foster parenting, what happens? How can we support? What do we need to do? And I think that changes at each, in each state. There's a different resource. There's a different place to go. Right. In the case of these grandmothers, for example, in Philadelphia, there were a number of different nonprofit organizations that were literally just surviving off of having, fish fries and selling clothing. But those are the resources that are available to, grandparents, or available to women that need to go in and figure out, How do I get support? What do I do? How do I get out of this? Right?
Yeah. But it's sort of ad hoc is what you're saying. I mean,
right.
Grassroots is great, but ad hoc is not so necessarily great.
Right.
I mean, does it need a national focus, a national organization or something that would say, I mean, if it's in every state, it is a national issue. All over the country, this is happening to children and mothers.
Right. So with the Adoption
and grandmothers.
and Safe Families...
And
right.
grandmother, yeah.
Right. With the Adoption and Safe Families Act, what is happening in a number of states is that there is legislation that's being passed that says, hey, we need to give incarcerated parents more time. They're realizing that the 15 months is not sufficient. So in a state like California and in New York, you have amendments to the Adoption and Safe Family Act at the state level. So in those states, you have them starting to do the work of saying, hey, this isn't enough time. We've got to figure out how to support these families. How do we support these mothers? How do we support the fathers that are incarcerated? They want to maintain custody of their children. So, there have been amendments to the Adoption and Safe Families Act at the state level in some states, and it's sort of, moving along now, that's been very helpful.
I see. All right. Outside the state prison system, the federal prison system, and local municipal so-called justice systems, does the same rule pertain?
Well, the Adoption and Safe Families Act is a federal law, and it applies to all states. There's just a few states that have decided that they wanted to make a change to that, right? Like, how do we?
I see.
How do we amend that to some degree so that our state does better on behalf of these families that are impacted?
I see. But it affects federal sentencing as well as municipal and certainly state. In other words, that decision takes place at the state level. Right.
It's for anyone that has a child in foster care, right? So even if you're not incarcerated and you have your child in foster care, let's say you're battling drug addiction and you're in a rehabilitation program, right? So it's just at the state level, if you have a child in foster care for 15 of the most recent 22 months, then you risk losing your rights.
Well, I've got enough aggravation to coast on for this day. Oh, my God. I'm so glad you're working on this, Sylvia. You're turning it into a book, right? Tentatively called The Shadow System.
That is correct.
And when can we expect that, my dear?
When is that? Spring 2020.
Really? Okay. Will you promise to come back and talk to us when the book comes out?
Absolutely.
All right. That's absolutely wonderful. Congratulations on this work. I'm so glad you're doing it. Doesn't seem anybody else has or is, and somebody needs to speak to this issue, and you do so very eloquently. Thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We have to take one last quick break, but then I'll be right back with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
And we are back again with some fighting words. Zurinsky, age 66, stands 5 feet 1 inch and is now the first woman to head the legendary CBS News division. That CBS News, yes, which once set the gold standard for television journalism, but lately has been severely tarnished by #MeToo scandals involving Charlie Rose and Les Moonves. Zurinsky came to CBS at age 20, worked her way up, became a producer for 48 hours, exercises 7 days a week, boxes, lifts weights, does Pilates, and has taken SLT classes because she heard they might make her taller. Of the sexual misconduct at CBS, she notes, quote, "There was some tough stuff that happened. Me Too isn't behind us. It's part of us. We're different people because of it," close quote. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is working from home this week since being released from the hospital after surgery for malignant nodules on her left lung. She's 85 years old, and this was her third bout with cancer. She expects to be back on the bench shortly. Florida Democratic so-called freshman in Congress, Donna Shalala, former Secretary of Health and Human Services, decided to run for Congress at age 78 because she was tired of getting angry about Trump and not doing anything. She is the oldest so-called freshman in her House of Representatives class. There's enormous press coverage of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as just turning 30 as the youngest woman in that class, but very little coverage of Shalala. Most of the coverage about the once and now again Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, 78, has been about wondering if she's too old to do the job. Then there's Democratic Representative Maxine Waters of California, 80, who now chairs the powerful House Financial Services Committee, the first woman and first African American to ever do so. Hillary Rodham Clinton won the popular vote for President of the United States in 2016 at age 69, and then watched as the election was stolen, picked herself up, and now continues doing work nonstop, mostly in the cause of women's rights. Recently, Jessica Bennett, author, prize-winning journalist, and gender editor of the New York Times, at a mere 38, wrote a terrific front-page piece called "I Am an Older Woman, Hear Me Roar." In it, she noted that men have long led major organizations and countries well into their 8th decade, retaining power and prominence, and, I would add, their welcome or unwelcome access to much younger women. The so-called demographic revolution, termed that by Professor Susan Douglas of the University of Michigan, is the result of a half-century of the women's movement this time around, building to the tsunami of Me Too. And, for that matter, determined by lifespan. All this was unthinkable when women faced a high risk of dying in childbirth, or, later on, could enter careers or politics only after their children were grown. But in 2016, the average lifespan of women in the U.S. was 81.1, compared with men's 76.1. Now, some 18% and growing of women aged 70 to 74 are employed. Having a job later in life is more common among women with higher education and savings, Bennett reports, while those not employed are more likely to suffer poor health, have low savings, and be dependent on Social Security. We live in a youth-obsessed culture that has convinced girls of 13 that they must be anorexic to be glamorous, and has propagandized teenagers to shave their pubic hair to look even younger. All the while, the obsession with youth for females, but power for males. During all that, a whole lot of talent has been lost that's now insisting on being noticed. Even the women's movement itself has followed the cultural trend, focusing on the concerns of younger women, and has strongly supported emerging young leaders. That is completely right, and also understandable, since the future is theirs, and the work to carry on is also theirs. But it's not an either-or choice when we can choose both and. Age can certainly atrophy a sense of experimentation, risk, energy, openness, but age has compensatory gifts. Never mind wisdom, because some people, old or young, have it and some don't. But you cannot avoid having experience by a later age. Experience you simply couldn't have acquired at a younger one. It depends what you do with this, certainly, but you must have acquired it to even make that decision. Experience is an invaluable ingredient if you ever do achieve that mythical wisdom. Skill, which is acquired by practice, another form of experience, is yet another quality of age. Mozarts are rare. Generally speaking, the longer an artist can manage to live, the better her work will become. Then there's the sense of relief. You're just more yourself. You don't sweat the small stuff like you did, because you know it's ultimately unimportant and it passes. And in retrospect, you cannot believe you expended such passion in a waste of such shame. Then there's sex. Some older women blossom with a newfound sexuality, while others celebrate being able to sleep diagonally in the bed and eat in the bed, and if they long for cuddling and kissing, they get a puppy. Either way, there's a strange rejuvenation in energy and intellect that resembles the feminist epiphany when you realize you actually like who you are. Christiane Amanpour is 61 and says a whole new chapter of her life is opening in replacing There Is Justice After All, Charlie Rose on PBS. Oprah Winfrey is 65. My sister co-founders of the Women's Media Center, Jane Fonda and Gloria Steinem, are, respectively, 82 and almost 85 and going strong. I could go on, but you get the point. We don't lack role models. We just lacked a consciousness of ageism, especially combined with sexism. And that consciousness is finally glimmering forth slowly. Although U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics show that more people over 65, almost 20%, are still employed than at any point since the 1960s, even when our jobless rate was close to full employment, women over 50 have the hardest time finding a job. They're continuing to work, of course. Remember, even when jobless, and yes, all their lives, they've been doing unpaid, invisible labor, lifelong, at home. This also is not simple ageism shared with discrimination against old men who aren't wealthy or famous. Ageism against women is uniquely tied with reproductive capacity and with patriarchal sexual attraction, both objectifying the humanity of the woman. It always comes back to sex and reproduction, which is why those basic human rights to self-determination are always the starting place and end goal for feminism. Me, I turn 78 in a few weeks, and one reason I can't quite believe that is actually happening is because inside I am basically, 38. Sure, I wish my body was younger and without pains in places I didn't even know I had, but although I would willingly exchange this body for one of my earlier ones, I would not exchange what's in my mind and in my spirit for younger versions, not even by 5 minutes. I love younger women. Mentoring them and learning from them is a privilege, and I'm grateful and relieved, wildly so, for their sophisticated feminism. I'm both optimistic and cynical. That, plus a wry sense of ambivalence and a well-practiced capacity to be aware of every moment of every day, these are only some of the gifts age has given me. And a sense of awe at the universe, and a sense of absurdity at my clumsy, beloved, cruel, evolving species. These get me through. I'm no longer afraid to be furious when I wish to be, and I seek only the approval of myself and those I truly care for. So this is in praise of older women. Offend or ignore us at your peril. This spring, 83-year-old Glenda Jackson is bringing to Broadway what theater critics unanimously have declared the greatest performance of our era, as King Lear. So get out of the way. Old women are coming. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag fighting words. And that's our show for today. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheRobinMorgan and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheRobinMorgan. Check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for our show. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.